The beautiful continent of Africa is blessed with an abundance of natural resources, raw materials, precious metals, and fertile soil. Africa comprises 54 countries, with over 1.3 billion people, producing $2.2 trillion in nominal GDP. The largest drivers of the economy are agriculture, natural resources, and trade. In 2013, it was the fastest-growing continent and remains a powerhouse of resources, ideas, and innovation. However, political and global turmoil have hindered its ability to meet its full potential. Today we are going to talk about top 10 most developed and richest countries in Africa. So let's start. Number 10, Tanzania. GDP is $62,224 billion. Rounding up this list of the top 10 richest African countries is Tanzania, with the GDP of $62,224 billion over the last year. Known as the home of some of the continent's most famous national parks and of course Kilimanjaro, the country comprises a lower-middle mixed-income economy. The country's economy is largely based on agriculture, contributing almost 25% to GDP, and employing half of the workforce. Tanzania has achieved a relatively high economic growth in recent years, with a 5.6% growth rate. The medium-term outlook is positive, which is supported by large infrastructure spending. However, despite economic growth and the poverty rate having decreased in the past few years, the absolute number of people living in poverty has remained the same. Number 9, Ghana. GDP is $67,077 billion. Ghana, found in West Africa, has an economy that is both diverse and rich in resources. With the GDP of $67,077 billion, it just makes this list of wealthiest and developed countries on the African continent, coming in at number 9. The country was the first in sub-Saharan Africa to break free from colonial rule, as well as the first to achieve the target of having extreme poverty. Ghana has an abundance of natural resources, helping to fuel an economic boom. Gold is the country's main export. This is followed by petroleum, and together they make up 50% of the country's foreign exchange. Other major exports include cocoa beans and timber. Number 8, Ethiopia. GDP is $91,166 billion. Found in the Horn of Africa, the landlocked country of Ethiopia, split by the Great Rift Valley, is the 8th developed country in Africa. With archaeological finds dating back over 3 million years. This ancient land is famous for being the place where the coffee bean first originated. The nation is the highest coffee and honey producer in Africa, making up a large portion of the country's foreign exchange. Other exports include legumes, oilseeds, and cut flowers. The GDP of $91,166 billion comprises agriculture, construction, manufacturing, tourism, food processing, resources, and energy. Agriculture is the region's most promising resource, making up over 40% of the GDP, 60% of exports, and more than 80% of total employment. Number 7, Angola. GDP is $91,527 billion. The country of Angola has one of the biggest reserves of raw materials in Africa. Essentially, it could be higher up on this list of Africa's most developed nations. However, due to resource mismanagement and internal corruption, the economy of the country has been negatively affected. With the GDP of over $90 billion, it comes in at number 7 on this list. Angola's economy is built on oil, with large reserves of natural gas and oil, making up over 1/3 of its GDP. The production and export of crude oil contributes significantly to foreign exchange. In fact, 90% of the nation's revenue in the export sector comes from the sale of crude oil. Other noteworthy exports include diamonds and cargo ships. Agriculture is also expected to become an important sector for the economy going forward. Number 6, Kenya. GDP is $99,246 billion. Kenya, a country in East Africa, well known for its vast landscapes and wildlife, is next on Africa's richest country list. Having a GDP of almost $100 billion. This nation, with its stable living conditions, an established coffee and tea sector, and rapidly growing agricultural sector, is the wealthiest in Southeast and Central Africa. The Kenyan nation has emerged as one of the fastest-growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa, growing GDP by 5.7% in 2020. This is a result of positive investor confidence, a stable political climate in service sector, a good macroeconomic environment, and a clear business agenda. Number 5, Morocco. GDP is $119.4 billion. With the GDP of almost $120 billion, Morocco comes in at number 5 on this list of most developed African countries. The economy of this country in North Africa is versatile and stable, experiencing growth in a number of industries over the last decade. It is the second richest non-oil producing African country. The country's economy is driven by mining and manufacturing. 30% of Morocco's GDP comes from industry, 15% from agriculture, and 55% from services. This is supplemented by a growing tourism sector, with locals being welcoming of tourists and the government placing a strong emphasis on attracting visitors to the country that is well known for its attractions. Morocco relies heavily on its agriculture as the third largest producer of phosphorus in the world. Number 4, Algeria. GDP is $172,781 billion. The largest country on the continent found in the north, Algeria comes in at 4th place on this list of most developed countries in Africa. Boasting a significant economy and available infrastructure and a GDP of over $170 billion, the county achieved a notable achievement of reducing poverty by 20% within the last 20 years. Crude oil reserves are abundant in this country and the economy is heavily reliant on it. So much hydrocarbons, oil and natural gas make up almost 70% of the income of the country. A recent discovery of more crude oil reserves have boosted this rapidly growing industrial country. Other sectors that make up the Algerian economy include agriculture, industrial works, commercial services, and construction. The country is also one of the largest suppliers of ammonia in Africa. Number 3, Egypt. GDP is $302,256 billion. This ancient land in northern Africa held the spot of the richest country in Africa for many years. However, the economy suffered severely and foreign exchange reserves tumbled following the 2011 revolution during the Arab uprising. With the most recent GDP of over $300 billion, Egypt now holds the 3rd spot on this list. Economic activities have improved and stabilized over the last decade to experience positive economic growth. The government recently concluded an economic reform program alongside the IMF, aimed at reforming and bolstering the economy. The country has also seen unemployment levels fall, an improvement in foreign exchange reserves, higher export of goods and services, and a bolstered tourism sector, all contributing to its development. The leading factors of the Egyptian economy include petroleum and natural gas exports, tourism, wholesale and retail trade, construction and real estate. The state has diversified its economy away from just raw material exports in recent years, and over half of the GDP now comes from service-based employment. Number 2, South Africa. GDP is $358.839 billion. This southernmost country in Africa is another significant player on the continent as the second richest and developed African country. With a highly developed economy, advanced infrastructure, and a GDP of over $350 billion, the country is considered one of fastest developing countries in the world. Often referred to as the Rainbow Nation, South Africa is one of the only countries on this list that is not reliant on a single source of revenue. The country has a good mix of mining, manufacturing, financial services, and tourism. It is also abundant in natural resources and raw material exports like gold, diamonds, platinum, coal, and iron ore. It is one of the world's largest exporters of these commodities, particularly gold and platinum. The country is world-renowned as a major tourist destination and places a lot of emphasis on tourism as a part of its economy. Number 1, Nigeria. The richest and most developed country in Africa. GDP is $446.543 billion. This West African country, with a population of over 200 million citizens, makes up an essential part of the African economy. With the GDP just under $450 billion, Nigeria holds the position of the richest country in Africa. The sizable GDP is mainly driven by finance, transport, infrastructure, tourism, and an abundance of crude oil. The country records around 1.6 million barrels of crude oil a day, according to OPEC, making it the largest exporter of crude oil in Africa. These petroleum exports make up 10% of the total GDP and over 80% of the export sector revenue. The large population have helped to propel Nigeria as the largest consumer retailer in Africa, and the digitally aware residents have contributed to the country's fast-growing tech sector. According to the World Bank, Nigeria's GDP grew 7% year-on-year, one of the fastest rates in Africa. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you liked this video, hit the like button, also subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss an update.